Now, if we look at very broadly at the quality of programs, and we can do that because in 2005, we actually had a national study where we observed the quality in a representative sample of programs in the United States. And so, unfortunately, participation in preschool has barely budged since 2005 in the United States. And so I think these are fairly representative of what things look like today. And you can see across regions in the Northeast, more than 70% of kids went to preschool at age 4, Midwest and West lower. The South only a little bit lower than that. The South is a leader among the regions just behind the Northeast in terms of enrollment in preschool programs. And then if you look at that blue bar, that's the percentage of kids that are in programs that could be called good or better. And you can see in the Northeast, it's almost 40%. In the South, it's not even 20%. That's a big difference across regions. Now, it's not good in any region, right? It is not good in general to say most kids in the United States do not go to a good preschool program anywhere. But when you see this kind of regional difference, it, I think, provides a strong indication that policy does make a difference. Right? It isn't inevitable that 20% of the kids, only 20% of our kids can be in good programs. Right? They got twice that many in the Northeast. So, key lessons. We ought not to ask whether pre-K works or not. We know the answer to the question, pre-K can work. What we need to be asking is, what do we have to do to get the results that we want from public programs? The details of public program design matter. Researchers may disagree about what you need to be effective, but we clearly have examples of what works, about what is sufficient to produce these kinds of long-term gains. What's been lacking is the will to uniformly fund these kinds of models. Now, scale up is difficult. I don't want to say it's not easier to run one good small program than it is to run high-quality programs across a state or a country. But it is possible, and the key to doing that, as I'm going to show, is having a continuous improvement and accountability system after you've provided adequate funding. So what's my evidence for this? Well, we actually have an example by proof. Anybody who studied mathematics understands example by proof. This example was court-ordered in the state of New Jersey, where a quarter of our kids in a court case called the Abbott versus Burke, our state Supreme Court ruled in the 31 cities where these kids live, they had basically a right to high-quality universal preschool education beginning at age 3. We didn't create this program anew in order to have the capacity to do this because the court gave us 5 years to implement this. We took the preschool programs, the child care programs kids were in, and turned them into a high-quality system. And this describes the standards for that. Every teacher had to have a 4-year college degree in specialized training in early childhood. Right? That meant they had to be certificated in early childhood. We did not have an early childhood certificate in our state when the court ordered this. It's a full school day, 6 hours, 180 days, but it's coordinated with wraparound child care from the subsidy system for extended day, extended year. Maximum class size of 15. You have to have an evidence-based curriculum. The state doesn't tell you which one of those to do, but it does tell you it has to be evidence-based. Gives you 5 choices. The state created early learning standards and program guidelines. These are standards for what kids ought to learn and standards for what teachers ought to do. They then created tools to measure whether teachers were doing that and whether children were making progress on those standards. Provided in-class coaching, 1 coach for every 15 classrooms, right? Because we were starting with a system that looked pretty much like that national description. And this was part of systemic reform. It wasn't just reform of preschool, it was reform of K-12. When these kids hit kindergarten, kindergarten teachers had to change what they did. And there's parent choice. 2/3 of our providers are private. Parents can choose any approved provider if there's a space available. Now, Board of Education has to agree that you meet quality standards, and if you don't, you will be fired. Right? How did we do this? Well, we didn't actually fire very many people. Mostly we depended on a continuous improvement cycle. We developed our standards, we assessed our progress, we analyzed and planned based on that. We implemented professional development at the classroom level, at the district level, or municipal level, and at the state level. So for example, early on we saw we made great progress in language and literacy, not so much in math. And so all of the state's efforts on professional developments for the next couple of years were focused on math. And by the way, every business does this that's successful. And this is what we teach in preschool. Remember I mentioned plan, do, review? It's the same thing. Okay, so what happened as a result of this? Well, this is the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale. It's one of the most widely used instruments to measure classroom quality. The yellow bar shows you where we were before. 5 or better is good, right? 3 is poor. And you can see most of our programs were in the poor or worse category to begin with, and we shifted the entire distribution over the course of 8 years. It kept moving. Today, almost all programs are in the good to excellent category. What happened as a result? Well, I followed the kids who went through here in 2005, and these are their test scores on statewide achievement tests, 4th and 5th grade, language, arts, and literacy, math, and science. These are the same kind of effect sizes I showed you before, so you could think of this as how much of the achievement gap do we close. This is not a perfect study. I don't have great controls for family background, and so I think it underestimates the impact of the program. But that said, 1 year of preschool, somewhere between 15 and 20% of the achievement gap, and 2 years of preschool, somewhere between 20 and 40% of the achievement gap. So these are pretty good effects. What else did we see? Well, I mentioned saving money from preventing grade repetition in special education earlier. Right? The kids who didn't go to preschool in these communities, 19% of them have to repeat a grade by grade 5. 17% of them are in special education. And this program brought both of those down to about 12%. It's not magic, it's not a silver bullet, but it's a huge difference in a community between having 12% or 17% of your kids in special education. It's a huge difference having 12% versus 19% have to fail and repeat a grade. And that is the #1 predictor of high school graduation. All right, so let's turn to Louisiana. My institute studies public policy in all 50 states. We're not as close to Louisiana public policy in early childhood as you are, but we do pay attention to it. And so when we look at what's been happening in Louisiana over the last decade, which is how long we've been collecting data on state policy, we see a lot of challenges. Access and funding in Louisiana both need to be increased. And this isn't going to be easy. We recognize that if you have dual goals for programs to support parental employment and children's learning and development, that's expensive. Right? But you double the economic returns because you're looking at returns not just for the kids but for the parents. You need a common set of standards and outcomes for all programs, and you're working on that and making good progress. But then you have to have uniform, adequate funding for those programs as well. I'm going to talk more about that. You need accountability at all levels, state, local, and program, not just at the program level. You have to have adequate infrastructure to support teachers and programs in accomplishing the goals you set for them, and I think with links to the public schools, because I do not see other public agencies that have the infrastructure to support a system the way public education does. So in New Jersey, for example, when we went to universal pre-K, we went to full inclusion of our children with special needs. Districts reported that they served twice as many kids with special needs in preschool as they did before, and they had no increased costs because they were now all serving the vast majority of them in the regular classroom. Their special education teachers were now itinerant. And there's a big difference between a private program and a public program. Before the transformation in New Jersey, if you're a private preschool program and a kid shows up speaking a language you don't understand, you just put them in the director's office till mom or dad comes back to pick them up and send them home and tell them not to come back. If the kid's a behavior problem, you kick them out. You cannot do that in public education, and it is not good for the kids. But private providers do not have the capacity on their own to support kids with serious developmental problems in their classrooms, with serious behavior problems in the classroom. And in our system, two-thirds of our private providers are private, and they do this because they're supported by the public schools. Right? All of the support to maintain those kids, all of the help for the teachers, the coaching, the special needs teams are provided by public education. They're integrated. The first time we did a survey of our teachers after we'd been through this transformation, I was actually shocked by the responses because the vast majority of the teachers in our survey said they were public school teachers. And I thought, well, somebody must have done something wrong because two-thirds of our classrooms are in private providers. Well, it turned out the teachers in KinderCare, the teachers who worked for the Archdiocese of Newark, they considered themselves public school teachers because they had the same qualifications, they had the same pay and benefits, and they had the support of their local public schools in doing their job. That is a systemic integration and transformation of the type that I think is necessary if you're going to bring a system together and produce the kinds of results I showed you for kids. So you have to have that infrastructure, and having set out your goals, you have to calculate the per pupil cost it's going to take to achieve that. Right? In New Jersey, we didn't start out with a cost and say, oh, we're going to spend this much per child and see what we get. We started out with a court order that said, you have to do this. Now go back and figure out what it costs. That's a very different approach. But it is, I think, the only approach that actually works for producing results. So if we look at Louisiana over the last decade, you were making great progress with enrollment growth until the recession hit, and then basically you lost traction and started moving backwards. And if you look at per-child funding, you can see per-child funding was pretty stable for a long period of time, and when you hit the recession, it took a nosedive. In fact, this dropped $2,000 per child, and that is the largest drop of any state in the country. Now, Arizona might arm wrestle you for that because they completely eliminated their preschool program, but they weren't doing much to begin with, so it wasn't quite the same kind of loss that I think this has been in Louisiana. This is a fairly large effort serving about a third of your kids. And to see a $2,000 drop per pupil in real dollars over a relatively short time is pretty scary, I think. So in conclusion, I think the evidence is very clear. High-quality early care and education can be a wise public investment, but we have to emphasize the can. It can increase human capital and productivity, decrease social problems, inequality, and costs to government, which means costs to the taxpayers. And it can support increased employment by parents. But quality is king. Without sufficient quality and intensity, we're not going to get the kinds of results that we're looking for. We're not going to get the economic returns. There are uncertainties in doing this. There are things that in any particular community and state, I can't tell you what exactly is the right way, the right formula, but I can tell you if you put a continuous improvement process in place with an accountability system to guide your policy, you can find the right formula. But this only works if you start off with high standards for what you want to accomplish, if you provide adequate funding for programs and infrastructure, and if you have patience. It took us a decade in New Jersey to achieve our goals. I think there are many innovative things that Louisiana has done in public policy, I find a lot of promise in the roadmap that's been developed. But Louisiana needs to say, okay, here's what we want to accomplish. Now here's our calculation of what it's going to cost per pupil to do that. And we're going to appropriate the funding, or at least set a date certain by which we will have the funding for this, and a date certain by which we will achieve our goals for enrolling all of our kids in those kinds of programs. If you don't, it just keeps slipping and slipping away when I look at not just Louisiana, but state after state. I have two messages here today. As economists, my message to the taxpayers is that investing in quality preschool education is one of the best things that state can do for the taxpayers. As a parent, I want parents to know that getting a good preschool education for your child is the best insurance policy for school success you can buy.
For taxpayers, how is early childhood investment good for taxpayers?
Well, we have very high rates of school failure in the United States. Even middle-income kids have a 1 in 10 chance of failing a grade, having to repeat, or dropping out of high school. That's expensive, so is special education. Good preschool program prevents grade repetition, prevents the need for special ed, increases high school graduation, productivity in the labor force, reduces crime and delinquency. And that's why some of the biggest supporters in this country of preschool are sheriffs, chief of police, district attorneys.
I think all the topics dealing with childhood education are important to give attention to, have knowledgeable speakers about, but we're talking about early childhood education and, educating our youth from the earliest days, whether it's age 0 or age 3, which is a lot of the focus now, to prepare them to learn and prepare them to learn through not only grade school, but a lifetime of learning. Early education, good nutrition, these are the core things that we want to address, hear about, get world-class speakers to help this community understand what does it take to prepare our youth.
And what do you feel needs to be done in East Baton Rouge Parish school system to improve the preschool and to make it more available?
Well, certainly availability of preschool classrooms is a concern in East Baton Rouge Parish, and having not only the students in the seats, but having the instructors prepared for the needs of a young child like that. So at a preschool age, it is critical that there's support in the classroom and that there really is support for the teacher and the resources necessary. Teaching a child at a very young age is different than teaching a youth or teaching a second or third grader. And those are some of the skills that we're trying to help bring education around. What does it take to prepare a young child for a lifetime of learning?
We all know the return that early childhood investment dollars bring back to not only our district, but clearly back to our community. It's really important that children enter school ready to learn, and early childhood education is really going to be the key to that. Right now, as we grapple over budget issues within our own school board, the allocation of money to early childhood education is really at the forefront of our conversation.
What will it take to get East Baton Rouge Parish schools to the next level in terms of preschool education?
Well, clearly dollars are always the challenge, but I can tell you we're working on plans right now to expand our early childhood education offerings and to really work to identify needs and to identify areas where we can expand programs and then locate programs in other areas of town so that they're more accessible.
It was a very informative discussion, and clearly early childhood preschool is a great topic for us to be covering, and obviously of great importance to the future development of the children.
Why is ExxonMobil involved in these issues that affect East Baton Rouge Parish school system?
So the education of our youngest members of our society is very important to us. Obviously, education becomes more and more important as our economy goes forward and key to our workforce development.
Good preschool education can be a great public investment. You have to have high standards, and then you have to put tax dollars behind that. And that may mean a tax increase in the short run so that in the long run, taxpayers spend far less.
I've done a lot of reading and a lot of research in the area of return on investment in education, particularly early education. I am just astounded by the data and information provided by Dr. Stephen Barnett. And he has published over 180 research papers, books, and so forth. And these go far beyond the research that I have read and I've accumulated and have put to work through the ADF by providing high-quality education and resources for pre-K children. So it's phenomenal. He's done not only a phenomenal job in the presentation, he has shown that he indeed is an expert in this area, and we need to bring him back for more presentations, again, to show the proven benefits on investing in early childhood education.
If people have questions like more information, what should they do?
Well, we want our listening audience and our area representatives to please contact ADF through our website, adfbr.org. That's www.adfbr.org. And we'll have the presentation on our website as well. Or to call us. Call us with any questions, and we'll be sure to be on the phone giving the information at 225-293-3345. 225-293-3345 for the Academic Distinction Fund.